Okay, good evening. We are now here with Saranell Murphy. She is running for state attorney here in Broward County. Good evening, ma'am. How are you doing?
Good evening. Please call me Sarahnell. I'm good. How are you guys?
Saranell. Okay, that's good. Good to have you on the Adams Brothers Podcast. And you're again, before we even get started, you're always welcome to come back. If you win the election, please don't forget about us. You know,
I
we're
won't.
an up and coming podcast, so please always come back and talk to us.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, Sarahnell. So why don't you just tell us about you? Tell us about, where you went to school, where you went to college. Just tell us how, you became a lawyer.
Okay. All right. So I have had the privilege of serving Broward as an assistant state attorney for 24 years. It's hard to believe, but I didn't start there, obviously. I grew up in a little town on the west coast of Florida called Safety Harbor, which no one's ever heard of, but it's basically a Clearwater area. I started there. I went to public school, and as an adopted child, my parents had a great deal in forming my perceptions on the world. My mom was a avid Democrat who fought for social justice and progressive causes. I remember her fighting for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, which is a little bit of a tip-off to my age. I am 51. And having those now meetings in my living room as a kid. But when I left Safety Harbor, I went to the University of Florida. Go Gators. And I originally Go Gators. I came down to South Florida thinking I was going to pursue a career in law enforcement. And I went through the academy down here. And I graduated. I started working as a felony probation officer in town. And that really kind of opened my eyes, working with offenders who were reintegrating into our community. And I thought, I used to watch the prosecutors in the courtroom. I thought, I need to be doing that. So I went to Nova, Southeastern University here in town. I did an internship at the state attorney's office. And even though I interviewed around the state for that position, I decided to begin my career here. So that's kind of the path that led me to be a prosecutor.
Okay, that's a very interesting path to becoming an attorney. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll go right on into our first question. My first question to you, Sarahnell, is if elected, how will you minimize implicit bias within the state attorney's office?
Well, the main thing is to be cognizant of the fact that everyone has it, and to educate people on the fact that they have it. There's a really interesting study out of Harvard, the Harvard implicit bias test. And actually, while I was on the campaign trail over the past year, Nick Harris, actually a wonderful person in our town, turned me on to that test, and I took it myself. And so I think the main answer to it is to be cognizant that everyone has it, to train early and often on how to guard against it. I think that we also, as sort of partners and stakeholders in the criminal justice system, need to make sure our law enforcement agencies are doing the same. While we don't control what they do, we certainly have an ability to have that dialogue with them. So I think the best way to control it is to recognize we have it, train on it, and to ensure that it's not being utilized. And if, as we've seen recently, it should raise its head, it needs to be addressed swiftly and with no apologies.
And that was going to be my follow-up question is, will you make the training mandatory for everyone within the state attorney's office?
100%, both attorneys and staff. We deal with very, very difficult and very sensitive and often confidential issues. And even the staff that is greeting the members of the public, they're an integral part of our success. And they too need to receive implicit bias training, because they are obviously also the front lines of dealing with this wonderfully diverse community that we have.
Okay, thank you for answering that question, Wayne.
Okay, Sarah, now, have you ever been disciplined or referred to the Florida Bar Association for a complaint?
Okay, I heard, have you ever been disciplined, and then you froze a bit.
Yeah, have you ever been disciplined or referred to the Florida Bar Association for a complaint?
I have never been disciplined by the Florida Bar, thankfully. I hope never to be. Over my years, there have been situations where unhappy defendants and or actually the case that's sticking in my mind was actually a police officer that I prosecuted that referred me to the bar. I've never had any sustained complaints. They were all determined to be non-credible.
Okay. What would you do as Broward County State Attorney that will differentiate you from Michael Satz?
Boy, I get that question a lot. Okay, so here's how I can define it for you. It's very simple. I have already defined myself as a prosecutor, an advocate, and a member of our community throughout my career, even under my boss, Mike Satz. And how have I done that? For example, when I was given the opportunity to become the chief of our domestic violence division years ago, he had never allowed us to run a diversion program in domestic violence, ever. It's a very, obviously, as you can imagine, tumultuous, dangerous type of assignment. So when I went in there, I realized that batterers had a new tool in their arsenal, and that tool was immigration. So not only were we fighting against trying to gain the trust and cooperation of victims, but now they were being threatened that if they came to the state attorney's office, they would have to face deportation. It frustrated me to no end. And in that vein, I fought for a diversion program. I gathered my data. I met with all the stakeholders, the Domestic Violence Council here in Broward, as well as our domestic violence judges at the time, Jeffrey Cohen being one. We discussed these issues. I put my plan in place and I presented it, and I was allowed to begin it, and it has met with great success. I am now sitting as the chief of our misdemeanor trial unit. When I realized that the civil citation program was not working, okay, I don't know how familiar you are with civil citation, but the whole idea of civil citation is the recognition that brown and black people are often 3-4 times more times arrested for de minimis amounts of cannabis, for whatever, you name it, it's a reality. So the county had their heart in the right place when they started the program. I went as the stakeholder. I was sent to speak to the commission and address the issues. When we discussed it, a couple of my concerns were that law enforcement as a whole needed guidelines. I feel, and I still feel, number one, you have to get all the municipalities on board, not just one, not two, all municipalities. And then you have to give law enforcement guidelines as to when it's appropriate to give, to whom you can give it, for what crimes, etc. Neither of those were adopted, and the program was put in place. As a stakeholder, I was able to receive the statistics from the program. And guess what I found? Where do you think the vast majority of civil citations were being issued in our county? Name a city.
Western.
Bingo. So when I realized that, I again got my statistics, using my training, presented my case. I said, I'm expanding our diversion program. There's no reason that the kids that are arrested in Lauderhill or Lauderdale Lakes for pot should be labeled a criminal when it was the choice not to give the civil citation. I presented all my evidence. I again was allowed to create and expand this program. And now those individuals are given 3 opportunities to be diverted through our office, which results in their charges being dropped, no criminal history. So I guess I get a little frustrated with the question because I feel that as an advocate, as a lawyer, and quite frankly, as a woman, I have demonstrated, that I have been effective in bringing progressive ideas and change and successes throughout my career. Sorry, dogs barking, kids coming home, sorry. Another example, I started a program called the Driver's Initiative Program, right? It addresses DWLSs. I recognized after being back in county court how many people get sucked down into that never-ending hole of unpaid traffic tickets and KPSs, and they get pulled, and then they get arrested for DWLS. We put this program in place to give individuals an opportunity to come back to court with a valid license, and when they did, their case was dropped. Since I started that program, over 7,000 cases were dropped for DWLS as a result of people being able to financially get a D6, get a valid license. You're not getting a criminal history for that, which is particularly important because the legislature just changed the law that on your 3rd DWLS, it can bring you 10 days in jail. So I don't know. I mean, that's just practical examples of how I do my job and how you can anticipate me doing that job office-wide.
Okay, Daryl.
Is there any more, just to piggyback off of what you just said, is there any more programs that you started while you've been employed at the state attorney's office other than the one that you just mentioned?
Well, let's see. I did the domestic violence diversion. I expanded the misdemeanor trial unit diversion. I created the driving initiative program. Those are the main programs, yes, that I've started since I've been there.
Okay. Do you do any work in the African American community, like community service?
As far as my outreach to the African American community, just by the nature of my job, I have come into contact with differing groups over my career, and probably my largest sort of contact in education, quite frankly, in that was when I was in domestic violence. Recognizing the sort of differing cultures and impact that domestic violence has and the challenges in bringing those charges and being successful to get intervention into the families. So, you know, I've always had an open door to going wherever I'm invited, whether it's a homeowners association or a public school system. And certainly campaigning has opened a whole new world of people who would like to speak to me and are willing to hear my ideas. And I think that's great. I mean, I'm here to seek input from the diverse community we serve. That's our whole role, in my opinion.
Sarahnell, many Black and brown defendants believe that there's implicit bias within the state attorney's office. What are your plans to address the implicit bias that is evident in the state attorney's office?
Well, we kind of already touched on a bit the whole training issue, which training is, first of all, recognizing that every human being that walks the planet, no matter what color you are, we have implicit bias. And so we have to recognize that, accept it, and then we have to educate and train on it. If we see an example, which we did recently, of that, if it is determined that it is something that's just not correctable, there needs to be dealt with swiftly. But I think the other thing that I have found success with in the smaller administrative roles that I've had in the office is, you know, the diversity among our office needs to be reflective of our community. When we are reaching out and we are trying to look, if you're talking to us, something bad has happened, you know? So to ask somebody to sit across a desk and discuss that is uncomfortable at best and painful at worst. And so having a diverse group of prosecutors to have a reflective representation of our community is critical. Right now, we stand at about 16.3% Black prosecutors and about 19% Hispanic prosecutors. That's pretty good. We can do better. We can do better by actively going to the universities that are available to us for on-campus interviews to recruit actively Black and brown attorneys. We also, here's the other key thing in my mind, is that those attorneys need to be trained and educated and then placed in positions of authority. They need to be in supervisory roles. They need to help train and explain to young prosecutors how important prosecutorial discretion is and help them recognize that many members of our community are not only dealing with disparities based on race, they're dealing with it based on education, they're dealing with it based in healthcare, they're dealing with it based in financial opportunity. And you know, our careers, like anything else, we're dealing with really young people. And that's not to say they're not wonderful people. There's a lot of young people in my race. They're wonderful people. And someday they'd make great state attorneys. They just don't have the experience to do it in the time we live in now and to implement the changes and things we need now and the dialogue now. And that's because you have to have life experiences to be able to do that fairly, right? I mean, with everything going on in the world right now, I am completely cognizant of the fact, look, ask my girls, I have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, they will tell you I'm the most overprotective mother on the planet. This job makes you a little crazy. I've talked to my girls about good touch, bad touch. I've talked to my girls about stranger danger. But I'm also very cognizant that I've never had to tell my children to be afraid of the police. And I firmly believe that no parent in Broward County or anywhere should ever have to have that dialogue. So the bias, it's a global question, and it starts with us being cognizant of the fact that we're dealing with these very young people with sometimes limited life experiences. They need that training. and that constant guidance to be sure they are doing the right thing.
And that's very important. Diversity is very important, and you have to have a diversified state attorney's office that looks like Broward County. And I like that answer that you just mentioned there. So thank you for answering that question, Wayne.
Of course.
Okay. This might be a little uncomfortable questions, Sarah.
Okay.
Your husband allegedly made many posts on social media critical of Democrats, immigrants, and former President Obama. He later allegedly removed the post after you announced you were running for Broward County State Attorney. How do you respond to the critics of that? Because I gotta admit, I received so many emails from Black and brown people that were very uncomfortable if that is true. How do you address that?
So the first thing I'll say is that the first time I became aware of that was that an anonymous sort of letter was sent around about my husband. And I will tell you that first and foremost, as a woman seeking political office, it was rather offensive to me that whoever, quite frankly, the coward was that sent around anonymous information, tried to turn the dialogue to someone other than myself. I've not heard anyone question my male counterparts as to their wife's political ideations or banter on Facebook. My husband is a fabulous husband and a wonderful father. And there are certainly plenty of couples around the country that may disagree on politics. I assure you that my husband is true of heart. He did this job. He was a prosecutor. And now he spends his time defending people on the state and federal level. So, you know, I think that, you know, the opportunist to cut and paste and send out that type of thing is really irrelevant to my race. You know, listen, do I agree with everything my husband says? No. I think the world would be a really vanilla, boring place if we all agreed on every philosophy. I can tell you my husband is a registered Democrat now who intends to vote for his wife. And look, I think the world would be a better place if those of us that might disagree philosophically could still love each other.
Okay. Did you accept any money from police unions?
No. And here's something I will tell you, because I know you guys are savvy about this. And like I said, I've viewed some of your podcasts in just curious and interested in your views on things and your concerns. So here's how it works. The police unions contact every candidate to come interview for endorsement. And every candidate goes and interviews with the police unions for endorsement. I didn't get the police union endorsement. So you go because you're asked to go espouse your views. I did that. They did not choose me, but the candidates in this race went and were in fact interviewed seeking endorsement. I just sort of wanted to point that out.
Okay. Do you support the smart justice reform efforts which proposes bail reform? Yes,
and here's how. And actually, here's another little sort of frustration in this, you know, in being a prosecutor and not necessarily a politician. You know, sometimes folks ask you to give a yes or no answer. And I'm always going to give you the legally correct yes or no answer. So when you ask me if I'm going to decriminalize things, I'm going to tell you no, because I don't have the power to do that. As you guys know, the legislature does that. It's been used as a tool against me recently because they print the no without the explanation. But here's the explanation. As I've sort of talked to you guys already about my progressive ideas and the things I've implemented in the office to sort of level the playing field, I will continue to do that. You know, there's a lot of, you asked specifically about bail. I'll give you an example. Some folks are asked, look, will you abolish cash bail? Well, number one, I don't have, the state attorney, any state attorney, doesn't have the ability to do that because that is something that is set, the schedule for cash bail is set by our chief judge in our county. Now, what I can assure you is if I'm the state attorney, cash bail will not be utilized to keep indigent people in jail or to use that incarceration as a tool for a plea. That's not what it's for. What it's for is in the case where we have a fear that the person will not return to court, or more importantly, that the person poses a danger to our community. That cash bail can be utilized to protect those things. And I'll give you an example. I handled the case against Zachary Cruz, who you may or may not remember was found at Stoneman Douglas on multiple occasions. And I took a lot of heat because I got a really high cash bond on a misdemeanor. But I got that really high cash bond on a misdemeanor because I needed law enforcement to go to his house to get the gun that I knew was in that house before he was released. And that happened. And sometimes the frustration with being a prosecutor is before a case is closed out, which that one is, so I'm free to comment on that issue. But I know so many things. When I went into that courtroom that morning, I knew so many things that I can't publicly discuss as a part of an ongoing investigation. And so when I was vilified and they said, it's like the Salem witch trials and you're only doing it because he's his brother, and I was thinking to myself, no, that's not why. But so it's a tool. Should it be used to keep the mentally ill or indigent people in jail? Absolutely not. I mean, that's why we don't hold misdemeanors, in jail. I mean, we just don't. I mean, there's all these thoughts out there that people get misinformation. You're going to jail for pot. No, they're not. There's nobody in jail right now being held for marijuana. We started our community court to try to hopefully address the issues of the homeless, that in tandem with all those mental health issues that they have. And it's working. I'm hoping that they get more funding when we come back online and we can continue with our community court to bring those resources to that population. So it's a tool. And I think a prosecutor would be crazy to say, I'm never going to do it. Just like I think a prosecutor's crazy to say, I'm never going to direct file someone. How can you say that? If Nicholas Cruz was 17 years old, I shouldn't have direct filed him. I mean, so that's my frustration with trying to get my message to everyone in the community, that there isn't a solid one answer. It's not a one-stop shop. It's let's look at every case. Let's look at that person. Let's look at the surrounding facts and circumstances to determine what's appropriate, as opposed to sort of just a checklist of, well, do this, do this, do this.
Okay. Daryl?
Sarahnell, have you always been a Democrat? If not, and I know that you mentioned that your husband is a Democrat and you're running as a Democrat, obviously.
Yeah.
Have you always been a Democrat? And if not, when did you change your political party and why?
I have always been a Democrat, lifelong. I get criticisms that people can't go into the public forum and find my registration. And they can't do that because that includes my home address. And 24 years as a prosecutor means that I'm protecting 2 little girls in my house and I can't tell you my address.
That's understandable.
Right? So yes, I have been a lifelong Democrat. Like I told you, my mom, I'm Irish, we're Democrats, but, and I did mention my husband is a Democrat. I will tell you, not that that's relevant to me, but my husband registered initially as an independent as a young man, was an independent the vast majority of his life, registered as a Republican for 8 years ago or 12 years ago, don't hold me to that. And of course has re-registered as a Democrat to vote for his wife.
Okay. Follow-up question. What specific changes will you bring to the state attorney's office if you're elected?
Well, I think that the major change coming from me is twofold. One, I have a very different administrative style. And that's not to say that, anyone is right or wrong, but I have a very different administrative style. And so I find, and I think that if you were to speak to any of the young assistants that work with me, I consider myself to be very approachable. I consider myself to be transparent, accessible. And I want to continue to do that. And I've done that, in our community always, in whatever post I had. I think that will bring, sort of rebuild the trust of the public in what we're doing. I think we need to be a little more, quite frankly, vocal about the great things that we do. Don't be afraid to put it out there. Hey, Broward, look at this. I mean, most recently, some laws changed having to do with drug minimum mandatories. And so the office did a retrospective look at people that had been sentenced on minimum mandatories, and 21 people were just released from Florida State Prison not because we had a legal obligation to do so, but because it was determined that that's what was fair. This system ebbs and flows and changes, and what is appropriate according to the law 10 years ago may not be now. And if it's not now, we need to look back and we need to make that right. And we need to communicate more so people know that, about us. Like our seal and expunge workshops, that's been the greatest thing as far as contact with the community. I actually 2 seal and expunge workshops ago, I actually was sitting at the table. A man came in with his judgment, seeking to seal and expunge, and my name was there as the prosecutor. He didn't remember me, but there I sat years later, filling out, seal and expunge paperwork for someone whose score sheet I'd completed years before. So I think I bring that sort of philosophy globally to the office, and my willingness to be engaged with our community and accessible, I think, is probably the biggest thing.
And you'll be in charge of, how many employees will you be in charge of at the state attorney's office?
We have over 500 employees. We're at about 200, I think, and 23 lawyers right now. The remainder is staff who are critical to our day-to-day operations, I might add. So it's about more than 500, 530-ish right now, $32 million budget. Big job, big. I've supervised, so between domestic violence and now county court, I've supervised hundreds of people, attorneys, staff, programming, but the big job is over 500.
And one other question. Will you be making any cuts, whether it's from the coronavirus or anything? If you're elected state attorney, will you be making any cuts? And if so, what areas will you look at cutting?
Well, here's the issue. So the legislature right now, whoop, there goes my light. So these things are silly. So the legislature right now has cut us 6%. And right now, you're going to forgive me, I'm going to let that go. So 98% of our budget right now goes to salary, and there's a reason for that. We're underfunded, we need more money. That's also a big push. I want to be up in the legislature far more, arguing for dollars for our prosecutors. But right now, with a 6% cut that we've been dealt, we should survive, meaning we won't have to furlough people. We should be able to survive and keep running. They're not necessarily done in Tallahassee, so I'm kind of holding my breath a bit, because if we exceed 6%, we could find ourselves in trouble. I mean, obviously the priority is to keep people working and engaged. There's no fat to cut. I mean, when you're using 78% of your salary for your budget of salary, there's really not a lot to cut. So I'm really hopeful that they hold it at that. I'm really grateful that they did sign to give our employees a 3% cost of living raise just in this last session, which we haven't had, I can't remember, 15 years probably, at least. So that's a blessing. And then, the legislature last year changed the starting salary for prosecutors from $40,000, and public defenders actually, from $40,000 to $50,000. So that was a blessing, because from a recruiting standpoint, when you've got kids coming out of law school that owe $100,000 or more, that was a big difference. So I'm hopeful that our budget stays where it is and that we can keep people employed.
Okay, Wayne?
Okay, Sarah, now do you think the state attorneys, the Broward State Attorney, should be a more vocal and visible in the local community? I always see Dade County State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle active on television. Would you take an active approach like Fernandez-Rundle in Miami-Dade?
So the short answer is yes, that I think, and we kind of talked about it a bit, about being more visible and letting the public know what we're doing. And that's easy to do. I mean, yes, 100%. I mean, I think that, conversations need to be with people and not about them. And, I'm not going to say that I will be on television for a soundbite, but if there is something significant that either we're doing for the good of the county or that is in controversy and that needs to be addressed 100%, I'm very open and happy to do that. I think that again, that is an easy thing to do to help regain the trust in what it is we are doing in our criminal justice system.
Yeah, because I see her sometimes. She's at a lot of community forums, and I think that we need an active Broward State, a more active Broward State attorney than in the past to deal with problems. I just think we need someone that's going to be more visible, if not vocal, just definitely more visible, involved in the community. I know they might not have the time, but I think if they show their face a lot more like Fernandez around, and I know she comes under a lot of criticism, and some rightfully so, but at least she's visible in the community when shootings go on or other kind of initiatives. She's right there, and I have not seen that in the past, and I've been a resident here for 53 years now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like I said, communication is key, and I think that, you know, when you're not able to communicate or you don't, that leaves a lot of room for miscommunication or misunderstanding. So, you know, I view that as critical, necessary, and important to opening this dialogue with our community. And I've always, I mean, if you ask, I think whether you're asking, you know, the criminal defense bar or the prosecutors I work with or members in the community that had concerns that have called for me, I've always been accessible. And, you know, yes, of course, time is important, but so are the issues. And so if there is something that's critical and that the community is concerned with, you make the time to address it.
Okay. How do you feel about the Black Lives Matter protests going on around the country?
Well, how do I feel about it? Look, I fully support their right, everyone's right to protest. I mean, I think that's how change happens, right? I mean, I think that that's kind of the fabric of America, and that, like I told you, I mean, I watched my mom fight for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, you know, many moons ago. But I support it. I mean, I think peaceful protest is a wonderful thing. And my record speaks to that. Several years ago when we had those protests, I don't know if you remember, at the ICE facilities, there was one down south and then one up north, and they made a lot of arrests of people who they had sort of used those alligator cuffs to kind of cuff themselves together, remember, in the intersections. And, you know, look, they were wearing signs that vocalized their opinions. I won't say bad words on your podcast, but they clearly voiced their opinions that they had the right to do. Now, were they obstructing traffic? Yeah, I mean, the police waited 4 or 5 hours and let them protest, but when 5 o'clock was coming, they made some arrests. I'm not saying they weren't lawful arrests, they were, but I declined all those cases. That's not what we're here to do. That's not a prosecution I would bring. They were speaking their mind. They were peaceable. You know, if you don't agree with what their billboard says, too bad. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion and to speak their mind. And again, I find historically that that's what brings change. So my heart breaks for the fact that I think those who are not there for that are not a part of Black Lives Matter, but are there to violate the law and to cause problems, my heart sort of breaks, because I think a misinformed public puts them all together, and that's just simply not true. Those that are capitalizing on an opportunity to create violence are not a part of that movement, or are not protesters. They're violating the law, and there's a big difference.
And unfortunately, a lot of times the agitators get lumped in, like you say, with the peaceful protesters, and you know, it kind of takes away from what they're trying to accomplish.
Some of them even intentionally, you know, mask themselves as a part of something else. And that's, you know, I mean, it's terrible.
Okay. Daryl?
Many Americans feel that racial tensions are at an all-time high right now. we all know what happened to George Floyd. It was a horrible, horrible death. Some Americans believe that some of the racial tensions are coming from our president. What is your position on today's racial climate and the tension around this country?
Well, you know, I had a hard time. I mean, look, as a prosecutor, I've seen a whole lot of terrible things and a lot of terrible video footage. But George Floyd, I mean, was just heartbreaking. And I think that much like other horrific moments in time for our country, it has sparked a good thing in that it has sparked debate, and it has pushed people who are in positions of power to recognize we are watching you. We are looking and we are watching. You know, I mean, again, I will always be truthful with you as to what the power of the state attorney is. I won't be able to dictate to the police what their policy should be. That's not my role. But I will be able to say to them that if you have an officer that's been disciplined 10, 12, 20 times, I don't think I'm filing those cases. Because we have to start with an accountability of who we're employing and who we're maintaining employment of to make strides in this. I mean, we just have to. So I think while the climate is tense, and I'm sad, you know, for our nation in one way, I think that the positive that will ultimately come out of this, that our young people are maybe getting a wake-up call to activism and to the importance of voting. I mean, do you know how many times in the past 14 months campaigning I've been asked, what is the state attorney? I mean, and these are not uneducated people. And I said, are you kidding me? Like, so, you know, really? And it's just, so, you know, I think the climate we're in is if people are opening their eyes and going, you know what? Like, I need to sit up and take notice. I don't care what color you are. I mean, if you don't vote, and my father used to always tell me, if you don't vote, you can't complain. So vote. But I think that, you know, our young people are also probably more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Although if we go back, you know, in time, certainly, you know, there were other times where young people, I think, awoke and became more active. I think that's what we're seeing, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Right.
Yes, I have a kind of follow-up question to what you just answered just now about the police and police officers like having, I think what you said was like 12 maybe allegations or something against them or something. Why is it hard to convict a police officer in Broward County of brutality or committing murder against an unarmed Black person or another minority? Often we clearly see crimes caught on video, and yet the officer is acquitted. Do the state attorney themselves and the office bear responsibility for allowing jurors to serve who clearly don't see what everyone else see? And I know you can't get in the mind of every potential juror, but some of the cases, Sarahnell, that I see, it's clear, and I don't understand how a lot of times juries are picked that sometimes clearly do not reflect the community.
Okay, so that was a couple issues all in one. So the first is why is it hard to convict police officers? So, okay. I think, and I of course I can't, you know, I can't talk about any specific case because I'm employed there. So, but here's what I would say to you. When I say an officer has 10, 12, 15 violations, there's a sliding scale of like IA type complaints of police officers. Some of them are sort of internal things, right? Like you know, you work details, you didn't report the income, or you took your car on a family, you marked unit somewhere you shouldn't have taken it. And there's a million of those sort of rights and regs that can be violated. And then there's, you know, excessive force and the things we're talking about on the could potentially be criminal scale. I see all of that as important because whether it's a, you know, you're not playing by the rules and working on the details or taking your car when you shouldn't or whatever, that counts too. So I think, look, as prosecutors, we're held to a higher standard as well, you know? And so is it hard to convict them? Look, I'm sure we've all could go back and look at trials in time. We thought, oh, that's a dead ringer. And the jury comes back not guilty. Can I explain that to you? I can't. I can tell you that my focus as the state attorney will be that I don't care what uniform or clothing you wear to work in the day. If you violate the law and I have a good faith basis to believe I can prove it, you will be prosecuted. Can I promise you a result from a Broward County jury? I cannot. Our juror pool is pulled from what we call motor voter. It used to be that to pull our juries, you had to be a registered voter before you would get pulled for jury service. Many years ago, that changed. So now, if you possess a driver's license in Broward County, you are a potential part of our jury pool to come in. And you know, over the years, I find that the jury pool to be selected from is reflective of the community. So, you know, beyond the exclusion of a reasonable doubt is a really high standard. And I think that we need to focus on what cases we're building, what evidence is there, and so that we have that confidence that we can be successful. You know, I will, the best way I can say is what I say to the young lawyers. 98% of our cases result in pleas. Why? Because the evidence, there's a lot of overwhelming evidence. You know, you've got the DUI case where the guy is vomiting on himself and he pleads. It's the tough cases that don't plead. We feel there's sufficient evidence to go forward. We're not going to let him off the hook, so we try the case. We do the best we can, we put forth the evidence, and then it's in the jury's hands. So I don't think there's like a scientific answer to your question. Mm-hmm. All that I can tell you is that I will implement what I've practiced in my career, which is I'm not going to back away from a tough case. You know, if I've got an officer accused of a crime and 4 of his friends that are going to say he didn't do it, but I've got videotape and some civilians, I'm going. You know, I can't promise you I'm winning, but our whole goal and what justice is to me is if you are going to, you're not guilty, you want to fight your charge, if I have sufficient evidence, I'm going to present it to that jury and I'm going to let our community decide the result.
Okay. That's all my questions that I have.
I have one more question and then I'll close you out. Drugs and alcohol has impacted all of our families at one point or another, maybe in the past or maybe in the present. If you have a black defendant or a brown defendant that gets caught with crack cocaine, and then you have a white defendant that gets caught with powdered cocaine, many times and I know some people personally that was caught with crack cocaine and they received harsher sentences than the white defendant who had just as much or more powdered cocaine. So my question to you would be, I don't think I asked you this question because I didn't cross it out. If I did, maybe you can answer it again. How would you address the issues of black and brown defendants receiving harsher and longer sentences than white defendants who, I don't have my glasses on, I'm sorry, who have committed the same crime? I'm sorry.
So very simple, same crime, same time. Right now, as I mentioned, we just did sort of a look back on when minimum mandatories changed to free people who, in following the law, which is what happened back then, they had to be sentenced with minimum mandatories, and now that's not the case. Going back and getting them out of prison. I don't see it, there should be no difference between, I mean, cocaine is cocaine. We're not sending people to prison on a cocaine charge now. It just isn't happening. To find an individual, and I think the last statistics I looked at, to be honest with you, were in 2018 for individuals incarcerated out of Broward County where the lead charge was a drug charge, meaning the lead charge. So there could be 3 or 4, but like their heaviest charge would have been like possession of heroin, possession of cocaine, whatever. And I looked at the numbers for how many people were incarcerated with that lead charge being drugs. And this is 2018, and I believe at the time there were 38, that's 3/8. And of those individuals, when you examine the criminal history, each of them had between 8 and 11 prior felonies before they went to prison. And that's sort of a score sheet issue, as you may or may not know. So for every crime that you commit, it's given a point value. That point value gets added up. It tells the judge what they may or must sentence someone to. So, but what that says to me is that's encouraging, because we are not sending people who are drug addicts to prison over possession charges. Our drug courts are functioning well. I think there's room for expansion there. I also think, though, the difference, I mean, I hear nightly this term mass incarceration, you know, and that's listen, I'm no slight on anyone in the race. There are younger people in the race that use that term. That's great. The question that needs to be posed to them is, how do you change that? Where in the system? And you have to have the experience to know that. I'll give you a perfect example. Repeat offenders. We have minimum mandatories that are mandated by the legislature for repeat offenders. However, the discretion to designate someone as a habitual offender or a prison releasee reoffender or a habitual violent offender lie with the state attorney. And here's where changes can be made and differences can be made for people. It's in the evaluation of the charge. What do I mean by that? So if you have 3 burglary charges, you technically could be habitualized, is the word we would use, right? And you would face a minimum mandatory. All right, well, black letter of the law, yes, that's true. A burglary is someone goes into your property with the intent to commit a crime when they get in there. That's the definition. But what we as prosecutors have a responsibility to do is to look at each individual case and person. What do I mean by that? I see a significant difference between an individual who is breaking into sheds attached to homes or garages and stealing lawn equipment to pawn to buy drugs. That's technically a burglary. But is that someone that should be habitualized and face a minimum mandatory? No, not in my opinion. But these are the kinds of significant differences that it's going to take an experienced prosecutor to effectuate. Not to say others couldn't get there over time, but hey, I got 24 years learning about this, trying to do the right thing. So, you know, where to do it and how to do it, like keeping my eye on that civil citation and realizing what was happening, that comes with experience, both as a prosecutor and life experience, I feel like.
And I think that's all everybody wants, is to be treated fairly. You know, I never understood if a black defendant was caught with X amount of cocaine, crack cocaine, and a white defendant was caught with more powder. And I never did understand why that was allowed to happen when a black person received a harsher sentence. And that has to change. We can't, this is 2020, and we have to nip that stuff in the bud.
And I can tell you, I don't believe that to be happening now. I think, and I would have to look back, that was actually a little bit before me. I think that was Nick Navarro, all that, cops show time frame when he was making the crack. I was a probation officer. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. You know, you have to, drugs are drugs. And whether I have them or you have them, the penalty should be the same. I think we really need to take a harsh look, though, at how we're dealing with those issues, as you say, of drug addiction, alcohol addiction, incarcerating people like that serving a purpose. Now, don't get me wrong. You're dealing drugs near my schools. You're giving it to my kids. That's a whole other story. But definitely, like I said, with community court, you know, we see the homeless population. I mean, forget it. They have all of them. It's a triple trifecta for them: drugs, alcohol, mental health issues. I mean, and there's no place for them in the jail. They just go in, out, and we have to do better with that.
I have a few more questions too, just before we close out. Have there ever been a case where you kind of had doubt in your heart that the defendant was guilty, but you was pressured by superiors in the state attorney's office or wherever else you work to prosecute that person?
I have certainly in my career come across cases where I had a question as to whether or not the person committed the crime. I have never been pressured, nor would it have mattered to me. I get one bar license and I'm going to do the right thing. I don't care who's telling me to do what. And there certainly have been times over my career where I've dropped cases where I felt I had significant question in my mind as to whether or not, and that's not even saying that in my mind, maybe I thought the person was innocent. That's to say that in my mind, I couldn't prove my case. So there's a difference. Both aren't good. We shouldn't proceed under either. But yes, of course, in 24 years, yes.
Okay. And has there ever been a case that had you up late at night wondering whether you could have handled it differently?
That's a great question. Look, I've been up at night a lot. It's just one of the perils of the job of being responsible for people's lives. I've lost a lot of sleep. Never because I felt that I wasn't doing the right thing. I pride myself on doing the right thing for the right reason, but the sheer magnitude and appreciation for the responsibility that I have. I've certainly had many a sleepless night over that.
Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, Sarahnell, you answered some tough questions. We put you through the ringer. And so now, speak to the people of Broward County. Tell the voters, the people that will be voting on August the 18th, why they should vote for you and make you the next state attorney here in Broward County, Florida.
Okay, well, I'll keep it brief because I think I've laid a lot of that out there for them already, but I'll tell you this. I went to law school to be a prosecutor because I wanted to see the right thing happen. And I have devoted my career to fighting for victims' rights and to make sure that the right thing happens. There's a lot of great people in this race, but what Broward County needs right now is experience and proven leadership. Somebody who can implement changes because they know how to do that and where to do it. Somebody who has forged relationships with these other stakeholders and can bring everybody to the table to have this dialogue about how do we make this better. All of us, we're all responsible. Open communication with the Office of the Public Defender, whoever becomes our next sheriff. All of those people, our public school system, that I've been really proud to be involved with my whole career. So what I would say to the people of Broward County is, if you have a question for me, please email me. Please go on my website and read about me. I've always been accessible. I hear people, I see people. I believe that conversations need to be with people and not about them. And I will continue to be true to myself, to do the right thing for the right reason. I will keep you safe and I will be fair. So I hope that I get that opportunity on August 18th, and I would ask for everyone's vote to be Broward's next state attorney. And I thank you guys so much for the opportunity for the dialogue. This is exactly what we need to get us moving forward.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
okay, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Saranell Murphy, she's running for state attorney here in Broward County, Florida. Thank you so very much for stopping by and taking the time out of your busy schedule down at the state attorney's office to talk to the Adams Brothers podcast, Wayne and Daryl. And the best of luck to you. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for the time. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
You too.